Real African stories and real African experiences. This is the Legally Clueless video series. And in this episode, we have a powerful conversation with award-winning actress Lupita Nyong'o on finding her voice and agency as an African woman, as brought out in her new podcast, Mind Your Own. Lupita Nyong'o, so how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. It should be morning your side, so good morning.
Oh, good evening to you.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us, right?
My pleasure.
My name is Adelle Nyong'o, and I head Legally Clueless Africa. Yes. And we started as a podcast, but we grew into really a new media company that amplifies African stories. And so it's such an honor to have you on here, not only because of your African story, but also what you're doing with Mind Your Own, which is such a fantastic piece of work. So I'm going to give you your flowers for that first and foremost.
Oh, thank you so much. And I should give you your flowers. I'm walking in your path now.
Welcome. So this is the thing. We were talking with the lovely ladies this evening, and we have women from across different industries, different creative paths. And most are linked to what you're doing. So creators in terms of podcasting, creators in terms of being on stage, both on stage and behind the scenes as well, production-wise, and just fantastic African women in the room today. And we were talking about ways in which our agency over our bodies are taken away from us. And when I was listening to Mind Your Own, I also went to St. Mary's Saints. And okay. I enjoyed that episode because I just loved the blue hair dye moment, which is what I'm calling it now. So maybe you can unpack that moment for us and we can talk more about why you felt so strongly to have the blue hair dye moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, my defiance started when I was really young. And I can recall I was like under 10 years old and I was quite the tomboy and I was climbing trees. I really loved to climb trees. And some man came to me once and just said, "You can't climb trees. You're a girl." And I was like, "What? Okay." And obviously when you're that age, you're very impressionable and you don't know what it means to be a girl or a boy and all that. So I just thought, why? I got two legs and other boys are climbing trees. Why can't I climb trees? And I remember going to my dad and being like, I was told that girls can't climb trees. And he said, "That's rubbish. You climb that tree if you want." And so I think it was like that permission that my father in that moment gave me. And my parents, they both were they were defiant. And my father, he was fighting for democracy in Kenya. So I saw someone who was always stress testing the status quo. And it left an impression on me. I learned from his actions even more than his words. So the idea of rules, it wasn't like I was like rebellious and just wanted to defy rules for the sake of defying them. But I guess I was raised to question rules, right? Because sometimes rules are in place and they're there to oppress you, And it's important to be independent of mind enough to ask why. So in that moment at St. Mary's, here was a rule that girls couldn't wear their hair below their shoulders and they couldn't dye it red or blonde and they couldn't wear makeup. And all those rules seemed very oppressive to me. And I was looking at the situation. We're the minority and somehow our appearance is being restricted in a way that has no bearing on our education, you know? So for me, I was just like, this is a dumb rule. And this is a rule that was set at another time in Kenya's history, and it hasn't been questioned. And so for me, that rule was a bullying rule, and I didn't agree with it. And so I found a way around the rule to kind of just like to expose the establishment for how ridiculous the rule was. And so it was my way of staying within the lines and stressing them.
Yeah. And I think there's something you say, like you decided to stress check how strong this rule was in that episode. So basically what Lupita did was she went out and bought, she had hair dye from Mexico, right? And she went out and got her hair dyed blue because the rule said you couldn't have maroon or blonde. And she came back to school and when she was stopped, she was like, hey, but this one is blue. So I really don't know. But I love that because when I was in St. Mary's, there was two students, they were a couple, and then the girl got pregnant. And then they said girls shouldn't wear big earrings and bangles, and we shouldn't hug boys, right? And so first and foremost, like the burden was ridiculous, but it was also being placed on the female students, right?
Exactly.
And
that's like, a form of sexism.
Exactly.
Which is unbearable.
I was like, how does a hug, what are you saying? Question for earrings, you know? And have you had more blue hair dye moments in your career in Hollywood?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Wait, let's see. I mean, in Hollywood, you say. So I guess in my professional life now. Well, I didn't know it was a blue hair moment, but the fact that I had short natural hair when I first came onto the scene was quite. I guess it was quite a revolutionary thing. It was just how I wore my hair. It was not a political act the way in which I dyed my hair blue was, but it did send certain vibrations through the industry. There was a lot of talk about, my dark skin, my natural hair, and my close crop and stuff. And I know that it definitely moves the needle for Black women being their hair being embraced on this sort of like in this world of beauty and fashion and stuff like that. I wasn't the first to have my hair natural. Cicely Tyson did it years prior, but it wasn't the norm, right? It still was kind of just not as common. There was still a lot of, I guess, just the culture of straight hair, weaves and wigs being the order of the day. And so my hair kind of played the role of being a blue hair dye moment, but it was not at all my intention, but I embraced it, I embraced it. I was happy to stand in those public platforms with my natural hair, and if it moved the needle and helped people love themselves more, in their natural state, great. And then more recently, last year, actually, I had a blue hair dye moment when I had lost a lot of weight for my role in the movie A Quiet Place Day One. But nobody knew yet about the movie A Quiet Place Day One. Yes. And so I was in I was undernourished, and I was very, very small. I was smaller than I think I was as small as I was when I was like maybe 12 or 13, right?
Oh, wow.
And so my body was really frail and I was weak, and I had just come out of making that film, and I was going to the Met Ball, and not the Met Ball, the Tonys. Yeah. I was going to the Tonys, and it was a day after I had wrapped the movie, or like, very shortly after I wrapped the movie, and I was not in my most confident body. And in that moment, I was being treated different because I was so thin. Like I was almost invisible. I was experiencing a lot of invisibility in a way that was really kind of weird, but it was because I was so small and frail, and it was frightening. I was frightening to look at, and it was frightening to be in that body. And so I decided to work with a friend of mine who's an artist called Misha Japanwala to create. She does these test plates where she kind of commemorates a woman's body, and she works on shamelessness,
Wow.
And so I thought, this would be a really great moment for me to embrace this body of mine, embrace my body at every stage. And this being a stage I never thought I would go through. But here I am. I don't feel particularly beautiful. And that wasn't the point of losing the weight, right? It was actually to feel frail. Yeah. And so I decided to embrace that body. And she made this gorgeous silver breastplate that I wore to the Tonys. And it was my moment of shamelessness, because there was a lot of talk about what's going on with Lupita and all that. And I couldn't respond to it. There's always been a lot of like unwelcome conversation about celebrities' bodies. It happens all the time. And we're commodified in this way that is, it's part of the course. It's part of I guess one of the downsides of being a public figure, that, people will have righteous opinions about you, and say their piece and let you know how they feel about things that are none of their business. But so it was my way of standing confidently and embracing that body and allowing myself to feel beautiful, even in a moment where that was not the purpose of looking that way.
That is so powerful. And it's kind of like you don't really know the whole story, but it's very hard to control what people will say, right? And especially with like social media and all of these platforms looking for clickbait, the title is what sells. They're not trying to dig deeper and find out what's happening. Is there a rule? Nothing like that. But I love that you talk about shame, because we have touched on it very briefly right before you logged on. I think shame is used as a tool to control women and keep them a certain way. And I'm 35 now, and I feel the third floor is when I started kind of lifting my head up and being like, hang on, I shouldn't be ashamed of this, that, or the other. And so what are some of the ways you take off that cloak of shame? And it could be traditions you have with your body. It could be things or rituals that you do, but that help you take off that cloak of shame and still find home in your body.
I feel that's a big one. Shame, and I don't believe you can feel at home if you are full of shame. Shame is something that actually displaces you, right?
Yeah.
Because it is a rejection of an experience that you are having. So I fight shame on a daily basis. I try and rid myself of shame as much as I possibly can. So in that moment, with that body of mine, when people were speculating about what could be going on with me and all of that, that is shame being cast on me. And I reject it. And that's why I did that breastplate. That was my rejection of the shameful speculations about what was going on with my body. And so I think that shame exists when we shroud ourselves from our truth. And so I really try to be as truthful as possible.
Mm.
And, and that's why all those years ago, for example, when the Me Too movement was happening, and women were speaking up about sexual abuse and assaults and everything like that, I had a story that I had hidden deep within and kind of like pushed down in order to try and move forward. And in that moment, when everyone was speaking about their experiences, I felt the shame bubble up. And I couldn't sleep. I literally couldn't sleep anymore because this was a subject that was being spoken about. And I had my story about Harvey Weinstein that I'd nearly forgotten. That's how much I was pushing it down, and I could no longer ignore it. And so it wasn't easy. It was very scary to, lift up my hand and say, hey, I also have a story to share. But I did so in order to rid myself of that shame, because especially when you are a victim of something like a sexual abuse, somehow it is the victim that feels the shame and not the perpetrator. And oftentimes society will add on to the shame when you speak up. And that's why women don't speak up, because of the added shame that the society will put on them. It's almost like blaming the victim for what happened. And so I think it's really important to build communities where we say, no, absolutely not. And that was what the Me Too movement was, and the Time's Up movement. Those were movements where women were banding together to say enough is enough. We will no longer be silenced, and we will no longer be made to feel like we deserved what happened to us. And it is up to society, to really help individuals rid themselves of shame. So I'm really grateful for communities that come together. It emboldens you.
True.
It's hard to fight shame on your own, but it definitely starts with each individual saying, okay, I'm done with this. I'm speaking up about it, and I'm going to stand in that truth.
I really love that because community plays a part. For me, I feel like I'm 35, I'm divorced, I don't have kids. In the most African of settings, that is something to be thoroughly ashamed about. Yet to me, it's...
Don't get me started.
It's something that I hold like a badge of, like, you chose to move out of situations that didn't serve you. Like, this is so powerful, and you chose choice, right? And these things that are meant to shame you are really, there's a different way to look at them, right? That maybe society doesn't really see. But what got me there was a lot of healing work. And so I want us to talk about the role healing and self-work plays in getting to a point where you feel like you have ownership and agency over your body and your emotions and your experiences. One of the podcast episodes that I think I had to listen to it in parts, just because, you know how as Kenyans we say, why are you shouting at me? It just felt like I could identify with it so much that I was like, she is shouting. Please. Was Freedom Fathers, right? And so in this particular episode, Lupita actually had her parents speak on, and like her dad talk about a specific experience that she went through when she was younger, and her dad, I'm going to use the word disappeared because, Lupita, I want you to unpack what exactly happened for a while, and then nobody spoke about it. And so I really identified with that because in the family, I'm kind of like trying to fight that. I'm like, guys, let's talk about the things that we went through, right? And let's actually find healing individually and together. So maybe you could tell us about what exactly you experienced for somebody who hasn't listened to that particular episode, Freedom Fathers, and we can go into the role healing plays in this journey.
Yeah. Okay. In a nutshell, my father was fighting for democracy in Kenya all my life, right? My father has been a political activist. And so at the time, he would get rounded up and put in, he'd be detained without trial, and he would just get snatched up and we wouldn't know where he was, and he would disappear. So this was one of those times when he disappeared. And it was one of the longest times that he disappeared. He was gone for over a month. And so in that state, we were basically kind of under house arrest, and we had our blinds drawn, and all we did was burn his papers. This was the task that my mother assigned us children to, burning his papers. And so it was a very scary time. And he came back, of course, and I was little enough that I was just like, he's back, great, everything's great. and but we never really talked about it. And also, he had a brother that had also disappeared, right? Before I was born, and that's why I was born in Mexico, because he was in self-exile from that experience. His brother disappeared and was absolutely never found, and it wasn't, and we weren't really allowed to talk about him, or at least I didn't feel like we were allowed to talk about him until my cousin was born and was named after him. You have to listen to the episode. Yeah. I don't want you to just be on Legally Clueless, okay? Go to mind your own. But anyway, that's it in a nutshell. And your question, I've forgotten. What was your question, Adelle?
So, like in the context of an African family, and it's honestly, when you go to mind your own, I think it's nice to listen to a podcast from like episode 1, 2, 3. But if you don't want to do that, start with Freedom Fathers.
Wow.
Just okay. I felt like that was like, it was so relatable. So I want you to speak to first the silence that African families have when we are navigating traumatic experiences. And it feels like we choose silence maybe because we don't have words for the emotions, or maybe it's safer, we feel. But I don't know what your thoughts are on the silence route that we all seem to choose.
Well, I think there's a number of factors that lead to silence, right? And I don't think that all the silence is the same. And silence can be cultural, right? You have a culture where you just don't speak about things, so people just don't speak about things. And then it takes someone to really agitate and question why we don't speak about things. Because culture and traditions are only useful until they're not, right? Yeah. They say like tradition is rules that are kept by dead people, right? The idea that like you come into a society, you're invited into a culture, and if you don't question it, sometimes you can be left behind. Yeah. Because the world is changing, and therefore our behaviors kind of need to change with it. Mm-hmm. For us as Africans, and look, I am not a scholar on this matter, so these are just my musings and the things that I think about sometimes. I think that because of colonization and that like kind of like change was thrust upon us in a very, very traumatic way and a sudden way, and we were forced to kind of like almost our old ways were demonized, and we were forced to adapt to a new way of life. I think that assault on our natural progression has brought about some very toxic traits. And one of those traits, when you experience such a deep trauma, is that you resort to silence. Sometimes some things are so shocking that you are numb from it, right? And then also for us as Kenyans, that was then very quickly followed by a political regime that thwarted our artistic expression, right? The Moi regime did a really good job of suppressing art and just our ability. And art is one of the ways in which we metabolize trauma, we metabolize change. And when there is a system in place to suppress that, it is no surprise that we find ourselves, at least to me, it's no surprise that we find ourselves in a culture of silence, right? Because there was a time I remember during the Moi regime where you couldn't utter his name, and you couldn't wave a flag. There weren't no flags to wave, right? There was so much control in what we were able to say and do. And that culture of fear leads to silence. And in that silence is toxicity, right? And so if we don't question why we're silent, we just say, oh, we're silent because we're African, that is problematic. I don't think silence is African. I think silence is as a result of trauma and a failure to question it. And I don't support that. I don't want to say that is my African identity, because I think our identity as Africans go beyond such truths, right? And so I think that so I understand the silence happens because of a lack of words, but it's also because of that. Silence begets silence begets silence, and it takes artists, it takes and people who are willing to question the status quo to change that, right? And we get to do that in our personal lives, on an individual basis, and then forums like this that can hopefully inspire people to speak up, And so for my family, it's been a few waves of talking about my uncle Anam. That started with the birth of my cousin Anam, who is an incredible music producer over there in Kenya. Shout out Block of Beats. You gotta shout out the fam, right? But
we say no silence.
No silence. Like, let it be known. And I'm really excited to have the platform like Mind Your Own, because even that story has brought a new wave of my aunties. My auntie reached out to me to say,
oh, wow.
It was so hard to hear that episode. And I said, I would love to hear your version of Uncle Anam's story. I have a friend, an Ethiopian friend who lives here in America, and she listened to the podcast and she said to me, oh my goodness, my father left Ethiopia and I've never spoken to him about why he left. And I reached out to him and asked him whether he'd be willing to speak about his time in Ethiopia. And he said, of course, you just never asked, So sometimes it's not that we don't want to talk, it's that nobody has asked the questions, And so I would really love for us to stop saying that silence is African. That's my soapbox right now. It need not be. We get to determine what is African because we are the Africans of today.
And I love that because even in terms of processing trauma, I maybe 2 years ago hang out with these Maasai Askaris at a place I was staying. And at 6 p.m., they all had a guitar, which was like a homemade guitar. And they were singing and I couldn't understand what they were singing. And I asked the guy oh, what's this guy singing about? What's this guy? And when did you guys all learn how to play the guitar? And they said when they were younger, the men would sit maybe in the evening and you would freestyle basically talking about the things that were stressing you. And so I was like, so you guys were doing music therapy, you were years ahead of us. And he was like, yeah. So whatever is stressing you, you kind of just put it into a song and you belt it out and then you pass the guitar to the next person and they do that. And so I do agree colonization was a very brutal interruption. And trauma, we know it sits in the body, but it's also passed down generations, right?
Yeah. Sure.
And so for you, what role did healing and going back to experiences in your childhood and healing those spaces, what role did that play in liberating you specifically as an African woman? Do you feel like you had to go and open up those chapters?
I still feel like I'm on the path to healing. I don't think, hey, I'm over here, I'm healed. You know, I think the work of being an adult is, if you're paying attention and if you care to evolve, it is healing, working to heal your childhood wounds. Because, like, you know, I don't think there's part of being alive, part of being human is being wounded. And it's about learning about how your wounds are holding you back. We learn ways to survive our childhood wounds, right? In order to get through that time when we don't have autonomy. And then in our adult lives, sometimes those things that we've learned to protect ourselves from whatever was going on as when we were children, they can hold us back, because when we're now adults, we now get a say in how we move. But we've learned patterns that don't necessarily serve us in our new environments and stuff like that. So I'm very keen on continually healing myself. I think that my work as an actor is one way of healing, because I'm always stepping into new shoes and considering life from another person's perspective. And it gives me a better understanding of myself, but also of humanity in general. And I'm able to learn things, you know, I think that we construct our identities, and in many ways we put guardrails up, right? And it can be limiting. And so as an actor, I have these guardrails. This is who I am. This is who Lupita Nyong'o is. But then when I'm playing a character, I'm allowing myself to look at life from a different perspective. And sometimes that will enlighten me to things in my own life that I have been limited by. So it's, for me, I love acting because it really does give me access to a larger sense of self. But then also I really love psychology. It's my football, you know. I love listening to podcasts about social psychology and things like that. I love therapy.
Me too.
So those things I'm like, and I love finding help. I love looking for support outside of myself, you know. And I value friendships, and I try to surround myself with people who will see and expect the best in me, right? And people who can be honest with me when I'm derailed or held back, or, you know, I really love honesty. And so I try to surround myself with people who are honest and people who are reflective, you know, and because I think we can grow a lot based on the company we keep, you know. I don't like it when people hold me to what I once was, because I think the best friendships are the ones that allow you to grow and allow you to redefine yourself. Like, for the longest time, I spent 40 years of my life being afraid of cats. I was known as someone who hated cats. And then I did a movie and had to befriend cats. I had to work with cats. And I worked to get over my fear of cats. And now I'm a cat lady. And my Kenyan friends are looking at me like, I can't believe you're the same person that I couldn't sit in a room. I mean, cats would make me cry. Right. And so that was an identity marker. Lupita, the one who hates cats. But now I'm not. And like, you can't tell me that I have betrayed myself now because I've overcome my fear of cats. Anything that is bettering my me and allowing me to evolve to a bigger and better sense of self, I want to surround myself with people who would embrace that, rather than hold me back to a limiting idea of who I am.
Yeah, you should be around spaces that allow you to expand. And I love that you talked about acting being a space that allows you to even heal yourself, because one of our audience members are part of the team that put together that created Too Early for Bads, and one of the productions they put this year together is Tomboya. And when we were talking,
my cousin's in that.
Yeah. And we were talking about it earlier, and Gadoni, you said that where you feel safest is when you're writing your scripts and creating those characters. So it's nice to hear the person who could be acting those characters saying that's also such a healing space for you. But speaking of that, when I was listening to Mind Your Own, what I love about podcasting is I'm allowed to be vulnerable. I came from a very rigid space of like broadcast radio, and you had to be switched on and happy all the time, even on your worst day. And now with podcasting, I can be crying in a sponsored episode and it's fine.
Yeah, you can be yourself. Yeah.
I can be myself. And so I feel like there's an openness and vulnerability that I experienced from you in your podcast that I hadn't experienced before. Obviously, because this is like a different format from a movie, etc. And so is this new for you as well? And like, how has that vulnerability been like for you? Was it a bit uncomfortable to begin with? Did you embrace it from the jump?
Yeah, it is new for me. I mean, my primary work is acting, right? And in acting, you're playing other characters. And so it's safe. Yeah, it's safe because it's like, that's a character I'm playing. Then it's just like, it's armor,
Yeah.
And so when I first had this idea for this podcast and got together with Snap Studios to create it, I didn't want to tell my own stories. That had not been the plan. I was going to find cool stories around the world from other Africans and tell their stories, because those were the stories I wanted to listen to. And then the producer was like, Lupita, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories. And I was very resistant because I didn't like, it felt too exposing, right?
Yeah.
I enjoy my privacy. And so I was not keen. And it took a year. It was a year of me resisting that idea before I finally heard the wisdom in what he was saying. You're right. There's something about podcasting that is extremely intimate and vulnerable because, someone's putting on their headphones and it's your voice hitting their hearts. It's just like it's something very intimate about it. And I realized that if I was going to ask other people to be vulnerable with their stories and the kinds of stories that I wanted to tell to dispel this myth that, this thing that Africans don't share, I needed to also share of myself. And so I reluctantly agreed to it. And then we started the process. And the beautiful thing was that the two women who I went on this journey with, the two producers that were in the room with me, had such a warmth about them. And so really the podcast is me talking to them. And it was warm and safe, and they felt like old friends. And that was the tone I wanted to strike with the podcast anyway. So it was that feeling a trust and a safety with the team that I had assembled that allowed me to be as vulnerable and open as I was. And I'm happy that I did it, because at the end of the day, I don't want to be naked, but I do want to be knowable. And the podcast gives me an avenue for that beyond the roles that I want to play.
And it's kind of like, I prefer the podcast because like you can be vulnerable about things you're going through, and it's just like the microphone. It's not a camera in your face.
But now you put a camera in my face. So how have you helped me?
This is different.
Let's
be silent. Let's be silent about this. I know we don't have you for too much longer, but I do want us to talk about chain of possession, that particular episode, because I realized I have a very intimate relationship with words. And so when you say certain things, I'll be like, oh my God, like, what does she mean by that? You know? And I don't want to give too much away from the episode. You have to listen to Mind Your Own. But when you're talking about the particular incident around the dress, you actually say being a Black woman in Hollywood, and then you quantify it and you say, actually being a dark-skinned Black woman in Hollywood. And I remember being like, oh, hang on, like, what's that? What is she talking about? And so I started like really sitting with those particular words from the episode. And I thought about back here at home, our reaction to seeing you get to where you've gotten in your career and celebrating you. Yes, on one hand, as being like, oh my God, she's one of us, or her name. Like, we know this is someone who's homegrown, but also maybe on a deeper level, feeling like she looks like us. There's a disruption. And the disruption is representation, right? And so I wonder, like, your experiences in your career so far, right? How have they influenced your views on global representation, specifically for African women?
That is an academic question, Adelle.
You said the words. You started it with your episode.
Yeah, okay. Come at me again. It's early in the morning. Come on, come at me again.
So, like the experiences you've had so far in your career, how have they, especially if we think about those words you said, dark-skinned Black woman in Hollywood, how have the experiences impacted how you view the importance of global representation, specifically for African women? Yeah.
I would say this. The reason why I quantified it with dark-skinned African women is because at the time that I was joining the industry, it was still rare to have dark-skinned African women. Dark-skinned women at the fore, right? In the spotlight and on the magazine cover, in the lead role. There was still, not much of that going on. And that was a lot of the talk about me at the time. It's like, what's going to become of this new, starlet? What is her path going to be in a Hollywood that is very colorist, And there were pundits that were suggesting, my career would just dwindle because of Hollywood's disinterest in embracing dark skin. And there was a lot of that going on. And I had to obviously deafen my ears to it because I'm not a theory. I'm a person, right? And I need to put one foot in front of the other and try and make choices that feel right for me. And I can't be thinking about dark-skinned women and how Hollywood is going to handle us. I can't be that. I can only be, I have to live in my body, not in a theory about me, And so I did that. I really just, I focused on how did I get here and how do I take the next step? And what is it that I want to do? And how do I continue to forge a path for myself, right? In an industry that was not expecting me and so was not prepared for me.
Yeah.
And I'm very proud of what I've been able to do in the 10 years that I've been in this industry. The 10, it's 12. It's 12 years of being in this industry. And I also realized that because at the time that I started, I'm the first, I believe I'm the first African woman to win an Academy Award. So I knew that I was making history. And I also knew that there was all sorts of misconceptions or preconceptions that I was going to be dealing with along the way. And what I decided very early on is that I'm not going to try and prove what I am not. I'm just going to be who I am. And that will do what it needs to do in terms of changing people's perception. It is a radical act to be yourself, right? And by doing that and by pursuing the things that are most interesting to me, like I've always been in love with being an African woman. I've always been in love with it. I remember going to Turkana and seeing these women with these gorgeous piercings, these brain piercings. And when I saw it on a Turkana woman, I wanted that piercing. I'd seen it in school, in undergrad. Everybody had piercings everywhere on their bodies, even their foreheads. Yeah. But when I saw it on a Turkana woman, I felt validated because she was an African, and I've always wanted to investigate my Africanness, you know, and I've always valued it, you know, and I've always struggled with institutions or in societies or that didn't value it as much. And I think that, again, it's our colonial history has us thinking that we're not enough oftentimes, right? And because we were told we were primitive or that we were, you know, or third world or just not enough. There's so many messages that we receive, both consciously and subconsciously, that we are not enough. And I've always just quite innately disbelieved that. I've just never believed it. And so when I came to this industry, I had a dream that Kenya could not support at the time of being an actor. And the country where it is most advanced is America, right? We know America really does set the agenda when it comes to entertainment. And I wanted to be an actor, not because I'm Kenyan, but because I'm human, right? And so if I was born with that desire and that's the thing that flourished for me, and I went after it, and I was lucky enough to be able to make this my life's work, I feel that my existence as a Kenyan is valid. Like, you know what I mean? It's just
as it is.
It is what it is. I am who I am. I am from where I'm from, and I'm proud of it. And so I move in steps to validate that experience. But I refuse to, I don't know, I just refuse to work from a deficit, right? Yeah. I'm happy that people are catching up to the fact that an African woman's experience can be a global experience, you know, that I'm not limited by the borders of the country I'm from. None of us really ought to be. Our humanity, I think, when we watch movies or listen to music in languages that we don't understand, what we connect to is the shared humanity. And that, for me, is extremely important, to be connected to that and to allow for my African identity to contribute to that larger human exploration. So, yeah, I think that is what I've learned, and that is what I deeply believe, that I am enough, and I hope that the work that I'm doing is validating people who may have felt that they're not enough. Because I've also gone through that, you know. I go through that in moments of doubt. Self-doubt is a healthy thing to have in small doses, you know? And so in those moments, I remind myself that my lived experience as an African woman, as a Kenyan, born in Mexico, is enough.
And I really like that, because I feel like the more of us, I love the bit where you talk about in just being ourselves, that's a radical move, because that in itself inspires somebody else to be themselves. But also there's just so much that is trying to get us not to just be. And the more I grow, the more I understand, even like in the journey of becoming, a lot of that is just found in being who you are unapologetically, because we're constantly like trying to get somewhere, but a lot of it is just like, who am I? And I'm okay as I am. And that then allows other African women to hold space for themselves to be their version and bring their version of Africanness, in quotes, to the table. So as we wrap, I want you, Lupita, to start thinking about, if you were to build this dream world for African women, what would it look like? What would that utopia look like? And maybe if there's two women who want to share anything that has struck a chord with them that Lupita has shared, we can get the mic to you in the meantime. So we're building this utopia for African women. What would it look like? Actually, maybe we can hear. So Lupita, do you want time to think about that? And maybe we just hear?
I want to hear, yes. Let's hear others talk for a minute.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Hello, my name is Nyokafi Masharia. By the way, I play your granddaughter in Big Mouth.
I love that.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm so curious because your family has such roots in the Kenyan history, and I feel like that's such a huge thing, and I can't even imagine what you guys had to go through as kids just to see what your dad was going through. And I'm curious, in terms of your storytelling, are these things you'd want to go back to at some point in future, or does it actually feel like, actually, I'd rather leave that part of my life in terms of the stories that you choose to create?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think that I'm an intuitive creator. Something will occur to me, a question or a thing, a curiosity, and I will be thinking about it for sometimes months, sometimes years before I take action. So I wait for, I guess, the whisper, you know. And so when it comes to my father's history, our family history, right now it feels too raw for me to investigate it in any sort of artistic way. I think the episode of Mind Your Own was a start, and I'm sure in the future I might feel more pregnant with the desire to do, you know, to look into it. And it is extremely valuable to me that my family story is told and remembered. You know, I think we as Kenyans especially, we fought for our right to express ourselves, and we mustn't give that right up, right? And so part of that is knowing our history and telling our history for ourselves, you know, so that also things don't get repeated, and that we get to know who we have to thank for the country that is ours, and we need to understand our history, right? And so it's a worthwhile cause to I guess archive that. But I am not ready. Personally, I am not ready.
I really appreciate the honesty, because yes, you've opened that book and you have to kind of like move to that chapter at a slow pace, and there's many people on that particular journey with you. At least that's what I got when I listened to Freedom Fathers. So have you thought about the utopia that you're building for African women?
Oh man, I was thinking about her question. I thought they were going to like share their own insights, not ask me a question. So someone ought to share their insights so that I could think.
Yes. Okay. So insights, so not a question, but if there's something that has, radiated with you, as we think about this utopia we're building for African women.
Hi, Lupita. Thank you so much for the conversation. My name is Anyiko, and you said we shouldn't be silent. So I'm going to say, I know you're friends with my cousin who's an actress, Sharon Mina, who was on Sugar. That's my cousin. But
my love.
You say, shout out to Sharon. But something you say that I found so beautiful and very powerful at the same time is that your experience as who you are, where you are, has made you feel validated to be a Kenyan. I found that so sweet, so powerful, and I think it's so inspiring to me and to a lot of us who work in the creative industry, because I find that there's a culture we have, and I haven't understood why we have that culture, that sometimes we're not as proud of ourselves. And sometimes we look out and we're like, wow, the grass looks greener on the other side. And when you travel around Africa, especially because I've traveled a lot around Africa, I realize even in other countries, they want other things. So some problems that we have, I find, are not independent to us, but are independent to the creatives. So it's paramount to look at ourselves as capable and as global in whatever industries that we exist in. Even if you're a Kenyan actress, you can be, and you are a global actress from right here. And the same thing, it doesn't mean that if you relocate to America, now you're global, or because you've been in Kenya for the past 20 years, you're not global. It's just a perspective thing. And I really like the way you described it. And thank you for that.
Oh, I love that, Anyiko.
Thank you very much for joining.
Hi, Lupita. My name is Kate. I am the host of the POV podcast. Welcome to the podcast space. It's really nice to hear from you. Let me take you to the utopia. We had that discussion earlier, and my utopia took me back to pre-colonial. Mekati Liliwa Menza, Wango wa Makeri. You've acted at Wakanda, you've seen. So I think for us, the utopia would be a forefront where the women and female stories of women are on the forefront. But one of the things that has touched me when you were speaking about how colonialism kind of took us from the course of what African is, I feel like a utopia would be where that did not exist, where I would still speak my language and you still speak yours. And for some reason, we still understand one another because we were trading in beans and maize, and we still were not at war. We were still friends. So I think that is beautiful. But even on that, let me take this moment and just ask one question. The blue hair moment. Thank you so much, Adelle, for, highlighting it. The blue hair moment comes with its risks. Scary risks. We've had people being blacklisted. Women who've been blacklisted in the industry. What is one of the risks you had to be like, you know what, if it happens, it happens, even with this blue hair moment? Because I know you've tested it during your acting career. Yes.
I mean, it happens a lot. And here I really have to thank my dad, because I went through something recently where there was really, I had to make a decision, and it was a big risk. And I was talking to my dad about it. And he said, he said something to the effect of, the change that matters will cost you something, right? And so if you stay safe and in people's good books, you risk losing an opportunity to change something fundamental. So I think it's a courage that I have developed and fostered and that has been supported by parents who oftentimes have not chosen the easy path. So it's like, I think I've learned from that. And as a result, for the most part in my career, it is the things that scare me the most that are most rewarding, right? And so I have made a habit of taking risks and accepting that that failure, there could be failure on the other end. But if I believe in it, and if it is true to me, and I think that it is powerful, you stand on the right side of history. Sometimes you go through hard moments, where you're blackballed, and it's not fun. And fortunately for me, I've had some moments like that, but they haven't been long. They certainly haven't been as extreme as like what my father's been through, or many people that I know that have just been through a whole lot more. When you fall out of the graces of your community or your society, that's hard. It's very, very difficult. But I guess it's the weighing of whether it's worth it, because like I'm talking about this Me Too movement, that moment when people started to talk and speak up, they were the ones who spoke first took the biggest risk. Because there's many times when women have spoken up and they've been condemned, and then you just never hear from them again, right? And it takes courage, it takes being bold to be the first one to say something that is not in line with what society is thinking. But then look at what happened. If you look at that time period and how many women came out, and then there is safety in numbers. And then something fundamentally shifts in society when that happens. Right now in my industry, now there's something called intimacy coordinators, which is a job that has been created where someone is present who is there to make sure, if you're doing an intimate scene, that both parties, or however many parties, feel safe doing it. There was that for fight scenes. There was always fight coordinators. But there was never an intimacy coordinator. When I did 12 Years a Slave, there was no intimacy coordinator. And, and there was a lot of intimacy of a violent nature in that. So I see the positive results of a time when women were taking the risk to lose their reputation, to lose their social standing. And because of those women who went before me, I was able to speak up, and more people were able to speak up, and something fundamentally shifted in the industry that I'm involved in. So I really believe in courage, and courage is taking action in spite of the fear you feel. So there's many moments when I've been fearful and taking the step anyway, and I really encourage people to do that. It's not easy. And you really have to. I also don't believe in bullying people to be courageous. It's something that you have to self-examine, and you've got to take those courageous steps when you feel ready to, because it can be ugly on the other side, and you need to know what you're up for, and whether you have it in you, and you need to be patient with each other, because not everyone is going to have the same courage at the same time.
I love like that, the words from your dad. I feel like I can't wait to get to write them down so I don't forget that. It's like that it's gonna cost you, right? But on the other side, like now there's intimacy. What did you call them? Coaches or intimacy?
Intimacy coordinators.
Coordinators, that's the word. So you can see the results of the courage. And so as we let you go, we've made you think about everything but the question you were meant to be thinking about.
Well, I think, but the utopia of it. For me, when I think about utopia, I want to acknowledge that utopia for me is like a vision of a future And utopia exists when the past has not been as we would like it, right? There is an inherent grief that comes with the longing for a utopia, because it hasn't existed and it may never exist. But if I had a vision for African women in a utopic setting, I think it would be, for me, it's about agency and autonomy over their bodies and their minds, right? A utopic experience as an African woman is where you can be independent and free and supported in your independence and freedom, where you can be individual, but also embraced by a community, where you are not limited by the word African, but liberated by it.
Oh my goodness. That's like so wonderful. So thank you for sharing first and foremost. And thank you so much for making time to be on Legally Clueless. Thank you for your podcast, Mind Your Own. Even the way the stories are told. I think there's an episode where I laughed so much, but it was your friend. I can't remember his name right now, but he came with his friend and he was telling the story. And I just thought that's such a beautiful way to have someone share their story. And so it's really, it's doing amazing work, even far from where you physically are, So if you're thinking of doing a second season, yeah, why not? Basically is what I'm saying. And so if you are watching this, if you're listening to this, you can listen to Mind Your Own on AFRIPODS, which is really trying to amplify a lot of African stories. And we also have to say a huge thank you to Summerbox for allowing us to have this space today with you, Lupita. And so thank you for all the work you do. Thank you for making time to be with us today. And we're going to let you go on about your day.
Oh, thank you. And Adelle, thank you for the work you do and for amplifying African stories and for leading the charge. I remember when I started, devising Mind Your Own, and I was asking around, what African podcast should I listen to? Just about everybody said Legally Clueless. So I know that the podcast market is young on the continent, but you are leading the charge and amplifying voices, and really you also creating you're creating an archive of stories and of history, and that is so important. So thank you for the work you are doing too. And thank you for embracing and welcoming me into the podcast space.
That is so wonderful. I have received and taken those flowers, but thank you so much.